All right. Well, hello again, everybody. Welcome to the members of the Meditation Australia community. My name's Megan Spencer. I'm a registered member with Meditation Association of Australia, otherwise known as Meditation Australia. I'm a meditation teacher and sometimes I'm a broadcaster too. Meditation Australia is a peak industry body for meditation and meditation teachers in Australia. So, welcome back if you've seen some of these interviews before, or welcome if it's for the first time. This is a series of conversations for you, the Meditation Australia community, to keep you connected, engaged, and inspired. And we're talking to interesting and inspirational people doing interesting and inspirational things in the world of meditation and meditation teaching in Australia and around the world. I just want to say hello to Ken and Elizabeth Mellor, who are our guests today. I'd like to acknowledge you before I go on to my spiel. Hello.
Hi, Megan. It's good
Thank you
to see
very
you.
much for being here. It's terrific to have you as our guests today. And I'll just introduce Ken and Elizabeth to those of you who may not have heard of them before. They are the founders of the Awakening Network, a not-for-profit, educational, spiritually oriented meditation organisation, membership network and teaching centre, which is based just outside of Melbourne in regional Victoria. Community is a big part of it. The Awakening Network, and this is their words from their website, and it's very interesting too, is dedicated to promoting spiritual fulfillment and personal well-being for everyone. Service to local communities and the wider world is an important part of this. Ken and Elizabeth also teach and make available simple, practical techniques and meditations that enable people to enrich and simplify their lives. Many thousands of people over the years have benefited from using them. They teach a practical form of spirituality, again, their words, that opens profound dimensions of awareness and fulfillment in daily life or everyday life. Ken, I believe your primary training is in social work, psychotherapy, and you've also trained intensely with 3 Indian masters during a 30-year period in your life. Elizabeth, you're an educator, social worker, family therapist, and also a psychotherapist. Did I get that right? Yes.
Yeah,
And
probably.
both of you are authors as well. Together, they specialise in self-awakening and professional and personal development, parenting, and they have taught, mentored, and practitioner-trained to hundreds, if not thousands, of people since creating this Awakening Network in 1984. And you were also co-facilitators at the last Australian Meditation Conference, which MA presented. And I was at the conference, but I didn't get to make your session. There was a clash, I recall. I looked it up on the program actually. And your session was called The Joy of Mystical Experiences and Its Practical Applications. So I'm hoping we can actually get to the joy of mystical experiences today and unpack that practically as well. I'm hoping we can do that through the interview. So thank you both. You've got an extensive body of work between the two of you and individually. And before we sort of start to investigate what you do and explore that, I just thought I would check in with you and ask you how things have been going through teaching through COVID. I know you've run quite a few Zoom group meditations and other online offerings. So I just wanted to see how COVID might have changed or even not changed your teaching practice during this period.
Well, we've needed to be aware of what the law is telling us to do, but we had started using Zoom in our work, what, a year ago?
Yeah, probably about a year,
Yeah.
a bit more than a year.
A year ago, and that meant that when COVID requirements were promulgated, we had already got things set up, and we just moved straight into our program and made sure it was aligning with the rules.
So it was
And
an
it
easy transition for you by the sounds of it, or not too difficult at least.
was also right at the right time, because we really only started to get going at about the time all this blew up, and we were contacting members of our community and people who we hadn't seen for a while. And the first workshop we did that was online, the first big one, there were about 100 people turned up, and
Wow.
came from about 9 or 10 different countries. And some of them came from as long back as about 1970 something.
Well, that's a bit awesome, isn't it, really?
It was really, really lovely.
Yeah.
Like everyone said, "Oh, hello, how are you? Haven't seen you for a long, long time." Really
Wow.
got us underway.
Yeah.
I think the COVID thing, the impact was that we were moving more and more in this direction of doing things online, but this gave us a boot into moving faster than we expected. And I don't think that was a bad thing. I think that was a good thing.
Well, it sounds like your community was ready and waiting for you. But just on that word community and network, you make a distinction, don't you, between, well, there's a particular definition that you have on your website around network. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing that with us, because it's to do with presence, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's about being present with each other, and not in a free way, like an open-handed way, with not trying to tie or claim or fix people in anything. It's about a free coming together, and with a very clear common interest, which is the desire for spiritual evolution, and how to apply that, how to actually live that in everyday life.
Do you define network a little bit differently from community? I know in part of your description you talk about a fluidity, an easy coming and easy going as it serves yourself and your needs, and I guess in a sense the rest of the network, as distinct from community. Is there a difference for you?
Not really. Like for example, now we've met, you're part of our network, but we're not going to try and get you to be a member of anything to do that. It means people can come and go as they want to, and as what they're learning is meaningful for them. And we decided that after having a membership process, which we still need to, because we're a member of the ACNC, and in order to keep that membership, we need to have members, which is an interesting sort of blend for us.
Ken, would you mind explaining what the ACNC is for those who don't know?
Yes, it's the Australian...
It's for incorporated associations.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Body that runs those.
Oh, the incorporation. Yes, I get you, because you're a not-for-profit. I understand. Yes. So you need to keep your membership base. Look, I was going to actually leave that for a little bit later on, this kind of nuts and bolts stuff. But maybe, you know what I find, the older I get, the more I do things backwards. I start at the end and move to the beginning, which I love. So I'm just going to go with that.
Remember where you were going.
Oh, well, we'll see. But I'll just go with that if that's all right. Because we are speaking to a membership of Meditation Australia teachers, I was going to ask you, in terms of practicalities, you've been sustaining yourself since 1984, and part of that is with a membership base. And I wonder if that might be, especially in our times now, which could be, economic downturn, and there are many teachers, especially in regional areas and rural, more remote, such as yourselves, going, how do I sustain my business? How do I keep it ticking over so that I can continue to teach and serve the community? If a membership structure is actually a good practical way to sustain yourself, whether it be in a pandemic or an economic downturn or any other time for that matter.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are not genuine, those are real issues for us, because we've been discussing on our board, what are we going to do? Because when we started this in about the 1984, thank you. when we started in 1984, we were doing some very unusual things, and that attracted attention. And we were doing it internationally as well. And,
Such as, Ken, were these unusual things you were doing?
well, we were sitting on chairs in front of a room and initiating people with ancient mantras in the ancient way of doing it. So that was unusual. But also, a lot of people started to understand that they could talk to us about things that we had information and experience about that a lot of people didn't have. And so our meditation sessions frequently were question and answer sessions about things like child rearing and what can I do about such and such a problem and so on. And it was lovely to do it that way because our spiritual practices were feeding that whole thing. So people were experiencing the energy and the shifting of feelings and attitudes and so on that comes from that sort of energy.
So a membership base kind of grew up around that for you guys because it was unique. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, we were unusual. Part of the background is, and it's very hard for people who grew up in a different age, was that meditation was regarded as something not just weird, but evil. And when I was young, and I've been meditating pretty much all my life, it was to mention to someone that I meditated took a long time of small questions to try out how the person was going to react, until finally we trusted each other enough to say, I meditate. It was like coming out of the cupboard. And I had friends who lost jobs, who were not able to rent houses, all sorts of quite serious consequences. So although things had loosened up by the time we actually began our organisation, it was still very uncommon and regarded quite suspiciously by a lot of people. And so it was a different world, thank goodness, I think.
Yeah. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because if you look across all of the religions and wisdom traditions, there's common ground. There is mystical Christianity and all that sort of stuff. But I am actually old enough to know this, and have heard many people speak about it and read a lot about it. But like fast forwarding to now, what's your take on the explosion of sort of contemplative practices now, or even the mindfulness movement? It must blow your mind seeing how present or out there it is at the moment.
It's fabulous. It's so exciting. So we've contributed something. We're part of what enabled this to be as it is now. And the choice is huge. People can find something that suits them. Just about any kind of meditation that they would like is there, and fantastic people teaching it. I think it's a wonderful time.
Well, you also have studied, both of you together. You bring a lot of education and study of your own to the network, and you did when you started as well. You bring a lot, that story of going to the East and bringing stuff back, where kind of this explosion has its lineage, this wave at least, with the work that was done back in the 60s and 70s and bringing it over to places like Australia. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your own spiritual practices and your own areas of study, and kind of bringing that to this membership at the start and maybe growing it over the years.
Well, it's really, that's a very short question with a very long answer. So I started, when I left university, I was a social worker, and I had come across a guy called Eric Byrne, and he developed a system called transactional analysis. And I'd done a fair bit of training as part of social work. And I needed it because my attraction to social work was that I was in a mess internally. Eric Byrne, reading him was a lifesaver for me. And I got more from Games People Play, which you might have heard of, which is one of his famous books, than I'd got from 3 years of social work training. And as part of that, I got interested in going further with transactional analysis, and I went to America in 1973 and trained over there for about 2 years. But what I discovered when I did that was that the way I had learnt using Eric Byrne's book was to teach myself. And he'd talk about a particular procedure that he was following for certain conditions. And I would then start to practice that procedure with people who had those conditions. And I kept that up until I thought I knew what I was talking about or what I was doing. And then when I got to America, I was there for about 3 weeks, and my trainer took me down to Juarez in Mexico for a conference, and we had what were called a treatment marathon, which was Friday night through to Sunday evening. And at the end of that, Jackie, who was my sponsor, said, Ken, how would you like to sit your exams tomorrow? Now, I thought it was going to take about 3 years. And so I was a little intimidated by this, but I decided after a fairly broken sleep, yes, all right, I've got nothing to lose. And to my astonishment, my way of learning transactional analysis really worked because I passed the exams. And from there, I built a whole series of things about how to live and how to be with people, and how what we do with each other can be self-defeating or engaging or whatever. And I also learnt while in America, I was there for about 3 years, a whole lot about child rearing. And so when I got back to Australia, a lot of what people came to me for was to get help with raising their kids.
And if was part of that some spiritual learning over there as well, or did that come later on? Some spiritual study.
Transactional analysis thought that that was a sign of psychosis.
Right. So you and Elizabeth kind of shared this this kind of sounds like contact with people who had I don't know, a prejudice or a discrimination against spiritual exploration.
They weren't allowed to be prejudiced because that was regarded as not good, but they wouldn't talk much about it. However, I made it one of my goals to really introduce an integrated version of spirituality into transactional analysis, and
Right.
that's what I've done over the years.
Right.
Plus, we've written 4 books on raising children, and that information came from the training in transactional analysis. So there's sort of you can see a blend there of the psychological and with the spiritual.
Right. And Elizabeth, what about you? Where have you trained or studied, I suppose, with the spiritual side of meditation teaching, and how did you bring that in?
I spent a lot of my early life trying to understand the experiences I was having and to find a way of, understanding them and knowing what to do with them. As I probably spent more time out of my body than in it. And in those days, the information was very thin on the ground. Certainly Christianity came nowhere near helping me. And I came from a family where we were shunted from one kind of Christian church to another as my father did his own exploration. And I got help from some weird things. I read everything I could get my hands on. And I remember I didn't ever like Enid Blyton except for the Faraway Tree, because I thought, well, finally there's something. I then managed to discover Dennis Wheatley, which is not a writer who I would recommend for anyone to do in spiritual exploration, but it was the only thing that had anything that was beyond physical in it, and it was quite nasty at times. But finally, I had one of my uncles who was he's a very, very evangelical Christian who was a missionary and worked in China and Singapore and in Asia a lot. He and his family came back one time and came back with all sorts of interesting books, and I discovered Buddhism.
Right.
And I would have been about 10 or 11, but I remember opening that book and just heaving a huge sigh of relief. I didn't understand from that perspective all of it, but I just resonated with that very strongly. And that was the point at which I found somewhere I could follow and read, and that I read my way through everything I could get my hands on, and finally started to find a place where my experiences made sense and had a meaning. And then I was strongly into all the Asian studies. I did a lot of that at uni, and when in my very early 20s, I finally met my first teacher, who is a man called Charan Singh from a system called Satmat. And that was the beginning of the formal having a teacher. And I've had about 4 teachers since then. And they've all contributed mightily. And my thrust all the time was trying to, first of all, understand what I was experiencing. And then secondly, how to live in the world when my experiences were so different to most people. And to live in a world where I made a contribution, because a lot of the time that was a very hard time for me. I was very alone with a lot of that. And as I didn't know if other people were in that situation, but I would like to support people in doing that. It was part of my goal. So I was also putting myself through a lot of training in how people worked and what happened. So that's how the two came.
Wow. And now you've both, well, back in the 80s, but you're still actively creating a place for people to come to you and I guess share their own experiences, not necessarily dissimilar to yours or dissimilar, but a place where people can come and explore in a way. And you've got a massive amount of practices that you teach people. Everyday living skills, healing and training, couplehood, self-awakening, self-management, parenting and child rearing, as you mentioned earlier, Ken, mentoring. And also, I love that you mentioned Enid Blyton before, because I was a massive fan as a child. But yeah, problematic, but I still have a soft spot for her books because that's where my imagination got fired up. And Elizabeth, you've written a couple of kids' books. Maybe you're squaring the ledger with old Enid, because I haven't spotted anything cruel in here. And of course, I'll hold up these 2 that you guys sent me as well, Ken. These are your books as well. So you've been spreading and sharing the love through the word, through the written word together. And I just wondering, picking up, Elizabeth, on what you were saying about serving others, creating a place for people who might not feel like they fit, or they need some guidance, or they're looking for someone to help them explore what's going on for them with the Awakening Network. And you're in Seymour, you're in a regional area, and I'm sure there are regional teachers watching now. I'm curious as to perhaps the peculiarities, if that's a word, or the specifics around teaching in the country. Are there differences, do you think, between teaching there and in a more urban environment?
Yeah, I think there are. Things are more relaxed now than they used to be, but even so, there's a bit more uncertainty around things like meditation. Mindfulness has made a big difference in it's become so widely available that people have got something that they can understand, at least partially, to help them move into that. By the way, if mindfulness had been what I first came across when I was searching for help, I would never have gone into meditation, because what I was needing was a really strong mystical bent. And although I understand there's a mystical element for mindfulness, the way it's presented mostly is not mystical. And I think that the availability of meditation is getting stronger and more common in the regions, and people are using it. But probably it's the kind of meditation that attracts people. I don't think at this point the super mystical does. Things that have got a practical application in that's obvious tends to be more
Such as
available.
stress management or something like that, do you mean?
Yeah, that's right. And also I think that the population's a lot smaller. So there's not a lot, there are not a lot of people. I think to have an ongoing practice where we only teach meditation in a regional area and we stay in a small area is going to be quite a challenge in terms of supporting yourself. I think we all need to add things like online work and movement around areas.
And that's
what about you, Ken? Yep.
I'll just say that's been a big sigh of relief, because with the advent of the virus, that sort of we had been using Zoom and experimenting with it for about a year and a half by that stage, and we were ready to go. So all of a sudden, the first experience was that very big workshop, and we don't need to go anywhere to do it, and we don't need to have a local community and that sort of thing, because it's all available in the computer.
And also, I guess you've been really nurturing this network, this international network, for many, many, many years. So you had that on your side as well. But I guess,
absolutely,
if we're going to use the word take-home message from that, which I never use, but I'll use it here because it might be relevant, that maybe diversifying is a bit of advice you could give people in the regions watching you guys now. But look, I'm going backwards, right? I'm heading back to the start, which was my first question, and we've got to get there because you've both, I know mindfulness, that's just not cutting anything for you. That's only one part of the spectrum. Let's dive into the mystical, because that's your passion, and I've picked that up from your books that you've sent me and what I've read and listening to you now. And I'm curious, Ken, you wrote this book, Urban Mystic. So what is an urban mystic? What is urban mysticism? And maybe both of you, can share what your love of mysticism is and maybe talk around that for us.
Well, I was sitting in my office quite a few years ago now, and wanting to write something, but not really knowing what I wanted to write. And all of a sudden I had an experience that I'd never had before, nor since. And a loud voice in my head said, "Urban mystic." And I thought, what? What's that about? But it really piqued my interest. And so it became something that was there while we were doing all the other things that we were doing. And gradually what unfolded was that we were working in urban areas with a lot of people in urban areas as well, which is a bit different from being out by the Ganges or up on a mountaintop. And yet we had the very good fortune of being trained with about 3 or 4 Indian masters who really opened up the mystical side of it for us. And so while it wasn't urban, it was mystical. And that was sort of a kind of blind stepping stone into where I ended up. And really lovely.
And what about you, Elizabeth? Tell me about your experience with finding the mystical side of, let's say, meditation practice, or the spiritual side, and also what the benefits are for people if they decide that they want to touch that for themselves, they want to explore that for themselves.
It found me. I had to work the other way from the mystical into the practical, and the reason I'm so passionate about it is because it's been really, really important for people to have a really practical way of using meditation, and it pays off. You know, people live much easier lives, they're healthier, they enjoy themselves more. However, for me, it's often missing this really key element, which was opening up to and understanding what lies beyond the practical daily life. And it's something that is absolutely astounding and beautiful. And when people start to experience that, they realize that everything we experience in this normal everyday life is surrounded by and under, everything is beneath that, comes from there, everything comes from there. It gives us a really different perspective. People who understand that they can't hurt things. You know, you can't go and tread on an ant once you've understood about a really beautiful experience of what life with a capital L is, which is much more than everyday life, because people will understand the enormity of what that does if you do something like treading on an ant.
The interconnection, are you talking about? Because you guys do, what's one of your headings that you explore and teach? Connection, yeah.
Connection. We can't hurt anything without experiencing it ourselves. We can understand the full beauty of all life and live in a really different way. And while we understand, it helps us also with the perspective of when we have things that are challenging, there's a context for that. And there's a sense of meaning and purpose that arises that's much more than, you know, the next paycheck or a holiday in 2022 or something. There's a much greater, we're living in a much greater world when we start to experience that.
Nor is it a dogma. Like, we're not trying to teach dogma. What we're practicing is what we have come to experience through our time with three masters. The first one for me was a 14-year process, and then we've been with his master, which was a 9-year process, and we now spend time with a woman called Mother Mira in Germany.
Yeah, I've heard of her. I lived in Berlin for a while. I have heard of her. Yeah.
She's wonderful. So, but what happens with that is that we, if we're open to what they're teaching, the teaching isn't words so much as the exchange energetically between what's happening in them and what then is set off in us, which is that when we're with real masters, our energy is drawn, the pattern of our energy is drawn into the pattern of theirs, and our consciousness starts to expand. So that's how it works, really. And
yeah. So do you kind of somehow juggle all of these different streams, like the practical side of meditation with mystical, with parenting? That's something I'm guessing that's grown over time. Like, it's just, you just keep adding to what it is you do. Is that right?
Yeah, and isn't that life? Like,
Yes.
we can't divide it up in little bits.
When
I'm just holding a document here. I had very little information about mindfulness until quite late in the piece. But what I discovered in about 1975, accidentally, when I was doing some work with a client, personal work, was that she got very upset, and it just occurred to me. I said to her, look, just pause for a moment, just stop trying to tell me about it, and feel the contact of your body with what you're sitting on. So she started to do that, and then this was all intuitive. And then I said, no, just look at me and see me. I'm sitting here, and look around the room and listen to the sounds as well. So I took her through the 5 senses, and she was sitting on the seat in front of me, and her extreme distress simply dissolved. And that was fantastic. Having done all those years in therapy, learning to be a therapist. And here was someone who was sitting there using her own process with a bit of encouragement, and she got deep resolution and peace and ease within about 15 minutes.
And I guess that's part of the beautiful benefits of being a teacher when you see that happen. But that
Yeah.
said, I mean, your website and your the stuff that you write about is refreshingly, mindfulness is refreshingly absent because it can be flogged like a dead horse these days. But you kindly invited me, both of you, to attend one of your online weekly Wednesday night online group meditations. And Elizabeth, you took us through grounding, and that was what kind of Ken has also just described there, grounding our awareness in our senses. Some might call it mindfulness, others might call it grounding. I know I think from what I've been reading lately across the wisdom traditions, grounding is possibly more a common word. But that is so super important, isn't it, when you're dealing with this crazy life? And that's a big part of your work, teaching people to ground themselves in their bodies and in their full experience or direct experience.
Yes, and it's about, for me, it's very much about having our feet firmly planted on the ground and our heads as far up in the clouds as we can get them, so that there's not a separation between any of those aspects of us. We're able to be present in all of those aspects, including the highly spiritual, transcendent states, as well as the really down to earth. And for me, the goal has always been to bring the two together.
What's interesting at the moment is that I'm writing something at the moment, which is a comparison between mindfulness and grounding. And through quite a few years, I created these 14 meditations. Each of them involves grounding as a core part of it. And then there's things about relaxation, about setting goals and achieving them, and that sort of thing. I won't go through it all, but there's what I did was I created the meditations, blending the particular thing, like if it was a task, what's a task and how can I describe that, and get people to define their tasks in a usable way and stay with the spiritual in the process, and came up with 14 different things that relate to things in life. And they're now in audio, and
Sure, I think they're on your website too, aren't they? Yeah.
That's right.
So look, we could probably sit here all day, or I'm standing actually, but keep talking for hours, but we've only got a limited amount of time. But I just thought maybe by way of just slowly winding up here now, I had, when I was going through everything, I really want to ask you this. If you weren't meditation teachers, what do you think you'd both be doing? And also, did meditation or spirituality, at least spiritual practice, did it save your life? Do you feel that?
Absolutely. For me, it gave me a lifeline. And if I weren't a meditation teacher, I'd probably be a visual artist, and I'd also probably be writing children's stories and quite possibly doing a few other things as well. I've never been short of things that I'm interested in doing.
Well, for me, we're complementary in many ways. When I was 14, my parents had deserted me. I had 3 brothers and we were all deserted. They went over to the UK to spend a bequest from that my father had. And at 13, that's not a good time for parents to go away. And that hit me really hard, and I didn't know what to do, and I was lost and alone. And I had a bit of background in the Baptist tradition. So there was supposed to be a God up there that was supposed to help under these circumstances. So I said internally, well, you've never done anything for me before that I know of, but I'm in real trouble. Please help. And all of a sudden I was just awash with love and goodwill and an experience beyond words, really. And it lasted for about a microsecond, but it was so profound that I thought, I want to have that experience.
I can
all
feel
my
it
life.
as you say that, actually. Well, you've just
And
defined mysticism in a way, or a spirituality, an experience beyond words.
that's right. And I spent the rest of my life learning to have that process and those experiences all the time. And I'm really glad to say that these days I do.
Well, that's a
But
beautiful
it
thing.
only took about 40 years.
I've spent my life trying to find the words or the ways to communicate those experiences.
Well, I'm sure there are hundreds and thousands of people who've listened to you both who are very grateful. Do you, by way of actually winding up now, what kind of feelings do you get from teaching?
It's just wonderful. It's part of my driving force is what I just said, and sharing that with other people so that they can find themselves in whatever way they need to is also important, and contributing to life and the world.
Yeah, a lot of joy. It's a really joyful experience for me to be connecting with people in so many different ways, so deeply and so vastly, and sharing this amazing journey with people.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wind up today?
Well, it's a bit, I think love is a really, really significant key to everything. And the more we can concentrate on love in whatever way we do, the more that will flow through us and the more things will blossom for everyone.
And I think you're an ideal person to be doing these events because the way you handle it, you are able to draw out from people what matters to them so that other people can work out whether they want it to matter for them.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thanks, Ken. Well, back at you both, I think. Look, it's been a real pleasure listening to you today. I know we've scratched the surface because between you, you've got so many lifetimes, shall we say, of practice and experience, and also as teachers. But it's been really valuable to listen to you both, and I wish you well. And I say thank you for all the great work you've done for so long to so many. Really like to acknowledge that to you. And I just want to let people know that if you'd like to find any of these books and find out a bit more about the urban mysticism inside of you or anything else, if you'd like to find out more about Ken and Elizabeth Mellor's work, teaching, you can visit their website, which is awakeningnetwork.net. So thank you very much, both of you, today for sharing time with us and speaking.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Megan. It's been
Very
great.
welcome. Thank you. So, and if you'd like to find out a little bit more about Meditation Australia, the services that it offers members, or finding a registered teacher near you, if you'd like to learn meditation, just visit the website meditationaustralia.org.au. Thank you for sharing this time with us today, and for listening to this conversation. My name's Megan Spencer, and see you again another time. Thank you.